Coolio. Let's get the ball rolling. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dallas, and with me tonight is one of our lead educators, Oliver. He's going to be having a bit of a chat about back-end development and front-end development. What's the difference? So we're pretty pumped to hear about that. Thanks. Gabriel he's just chilling, eating Indian. Perfect. Sounds magical. Awesome. So before we throw to Oliver, I'm just going to ask you guys to do a few things, just a little bit of housekeeping. You might find on the chat panel, there's a section that says to, and it might currently say hosts and panelists. If you could do me a favor, click on that and change it to everyone. That way, if there's any questions that get thrown in there, everyone can see the question, and then we'll answer the question. Everyone can see the answer as well. But yeah, other than that, throw in questions into chat as we go. I'll do my best to answer any questions, but if there are some that are sort of directed towards Oliver, we might sort of keep them till the end and then have a bit of a Q&A then. But yeah, other than that, I will throw it across to Oliver. Good luck.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you very much, Dallas. So yeah, folks, please do, while I'm talking through tonight, just ask any questions that you might have in the chat. I'll probably save the answers until the end, but I believe that we're going to be compiling those so that hopefully I won't miss any. We'll do a little Q&A session anyway. So my name is Oliver. I'm one of the lead educators at Coder Academy. I am a web developer and I work in Devops as well. So I am mainly concerned with making, creating, and distributing websites. For the last couple of years, I've been working as an educator here at Coder Academy, and that is also what I teach. So I have experience with particularly Python and JavaScript, working on React and Flask, and using AWS to set those websites up. But tonight, what I'm going to be talking about is a question that we get fairly often, especially when people are first entering one of our boot camps. And that is, what is this front-end versus back-end distinction that gets thrown around? People often hear the words front-end, back-end, especially if you've been looking at jobs online. You'll often see people are looking for a front-end developer or a back-end developer. And if you haven't yet entered the study of computer science or IT, you might not be 100% familiar with what those terms mean. So we're going to run through that now. By the way, in addition to this recording, I've put together kind of a written companion document for this lecture, and I can distribute that at the end. I'll post a link in chat or something like that. So just to get started, you've heard about my professional qualifications. I also, in my spare time, occasionally fall off cliffs and climb rocks. And if you happen to be looking later on at that back-end versus front-end companion document that I just mentioned, you'll see some photos of me in there that show me in my natural habitat. Let me see if I can get a quick screen share going so that you are all able to follow along when I am talking about some code. So here we go. Okay, looks good, I think. So this is me in my natural habitat. Perfect. All right, what are we talking about when we talk about back-end versus front-end? Well, in order to tell you a little bit about how that came to be, first we need to talk about the history of web development and how we got to where we are right now. So I want to talk quickly about what a website really is. If you've been using computers for the last 30 years or so, or any time in that 30 years, you're probably familiar with the idea that computers contain files and that there are programs on computers that you can use to open and manipulate those files. So just as an example, here is this same image being opened and manipulated in Microsoft Paint. I think it's an improvement, don't you? And this is pretty standard stuff for most computer users. But what some computer users don't realize is that a website is exactly the same thing. A website is just a file that can be opened on your computer using a program. The program that we use to open a website is called a browser. And you'd be familiar with Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. The only difference between that classic file being opened on your computer system and a website is that when it comes to websites, the file is stored on somebody else's computer, which means that when you want to access that website, rather than opening up a file that you already have, your computer is sending a request out to somebody else's computer. And that other computer, which we would call a web server, responds with the website file. Then your browser can open it and you can view it. Now, the basic file format that we use for writing those websites is HTML. That stands for the Hypertext Markup Language. And sometimes if we want to make them a little bit fancy, we'll include a CSS file. That means cascading style sheets. It basically just adds a little bit of pizzazz to the website. And back in the bad old days, that was pretty much all we had. And I think if everything goes to plan here, I can give you a little example of a website that I coded just like that. So let's open this. Beautiful. Here, by the way, is that HTML code. This is a simple enough website that a lot of what we're seeing will probably make sense even just to a casual viewer. But if I launch that website locally, here we go. We can see my website is a shopping list. Just got some delicious ingredients listed on it. And it's so simple. Got a heading here and some dot points. Now, back in the bad old days, this was pretty much all we had. If I want to see another page of this website, my computer is going to have to send another request to somebody else's computer. And if I want something to change about this website, well, again, I'm going to have to send out another request because the file that is generating this website, which looks like this, has been received by my computer and it's pretty much set. There's no way that I, as a programmer, can change that after I send it out to somebody. So, okay, problems. Like we said, if you want to see a different page, you need to send a new request. If you want something to change, you need to send a new request. And crucially, all of the work of turning somebody's request into this website is done on my computer. And that means that my computer has a lot of work to do if a lot of people want to access the website. Now, if we came up with a metaphor for how this type of website works, we could probably say that it's something like a pizza delivery restaurant. And I really blew out the budget with this next graphic, let me tell you. Here it is in all its glory. So when I want a pizza, I send a request to the restaurant. The restaurant prepares the pizza, sends a delivery driver who drops it off to me. And then if later on I want a garlic bread, well, it's too late. That delivery was already sent. It didn't have a garlic bread in it. I'm going to have to send another request through to that pizza delivery restaurant, and they're going to have to send out another delivery driver. So this is not the most efficient system you can probably guess. What we tend to get out of this is clunky, bland websites that tie up the resources of the web server of the computer that's sending out those files. But it does get the job done. If you put in a lot of effort and create some really clever, beautiful HTML and CSS files, you can make something pretty glorious out of this simple structure. But we can do better. And that's kind of the second step of the development of the internet. Once the internet stopped being something that like just defense personnel and research academics were using in universities, once it got into the hands of the general public and started being used for business, it pretty quickly became apparent that this kind of structure, this very silly diagram, was not going to cut it. We needed something with a little bit more oomph. And in particular, what we wanted was a way to make web pages fun and interactive. We needed a way to make them change from moment to moment in the user's hands without having to go through all that back and forth of sending new requests, sending new files. So what we came up with, or not me, but what programmers came up with around 1995 was JavaScript. So we've talked about HTML and CSS. They're both presentation languages. They're mainly concerned with what you can show a user and what information can be set down on a page, on a web page. JavaScript, on the other hand, is a full-on programming language. So you can not just limit yourself to how things should look, you can describe how things should change, how the user should be allowed to interact with the web page, and how the user's interactions should affect what they see on the web page. The really, really exciting thing about JavaScript is that it's designed to run on the user's browser. So instead of running on my computer when you ask me for a website, JavaScript runs on your computer when you ask me for a website. And that's pretty huge, because that means that I can send you an HTML file sprinkled with a little bit of JavaScript. You can receive that file looking something like this. And then when the JavaScript kicks into action, when it wakes up on your computer and starts working, it will be able to change what's in this HTML file from moment to moment. It's kind of like changing the wheels on a car while the car's in motion. So with a little bit of tech magic here, I should be able to demonstrate a website that has some JavaScript in it. Let's have a go. Better. Good stuff. Some classic errors going on. What I'm doing here, by the way, is just setting up that website ready to launch. So perhaps it looks a little bit scary, but don't worry, because we are about to see the website itself.
Hey, Oliver.
Yes, indeed.
Are we supposed to be seeing something other than the user one pizza, please?
Yes, you are. Okay, thank you. Don't worry. I just changed the screen over, so I will fix that screen share. Thank you very much. Let's bring it back up. Beautiful. Let me make sure I have the right window here for you as well. It'd be embarrassing if I gave you back the one pizza please website again. Here we go. Looks good. Okay, so this is very similar to what we saw before. Before we had that shopping list website, it had a heading and a list of dot points. But now through the magic of JavaScript, I've added a couple of buttons. And without ever having to request a new file from my web server, I can change the way the website looks. Here I'm toggling back and forth between a dark mode and a light mode. And what that means is the HTML file that we got sent through before is being changed in real time. It's pretty exciting, even though this is a really simple website. Now that solves a lot of problems for us. And it really frees up some space on my computer when I am serving a website to you. But there's still a problem here. And the final problem that we have here is that when I sat down to create this website, I had to know in advance everything that it would have in it. I sat down and said, okay, well, I want a website. It's going to have 4 dot points and a heading and 2 buttons. And when the buttons get clicked, I want it to either go into dark mode with a slate green background or light mode with a white background. That means everything that is involved in this website had to be set up in advance. And that is not, again, not the most efficient thing. Because let's say I want to add a new item to my shopping list, or even better, let's say I want the users to be able to add a new item to the shopping list. Well, okay. This is where the difference between the back end and the front end really comes into play. What I need to do is set up a computer somewhere whose only job it is to keep track of the information that I have on my website. It's not going to have this JavaScript or this HTML on it, but what it's going to have is a list of all the dot points that I want to have, a list of all the items that I want to have in my cart. And if I have a more complex website, like a Facebook or an Instagram or something like that, this computer can also keep track of the different people who are allowed to access my website, the users, and the different images that they upload to the website. We call this a database. And a database is really just a computer somewhere that has a big table, almost like an Excel spreadsheet, that contains all of the information that we want to store. Then what I can do is write a JavaScript website whose only job it is to present whatever information that database contains. So what's going to happen is I am going to set up the website. People will request access to it. In response, I'll send them an HTML file with a little bit of magic JavaScript sprinkled in. And that JavaScript, when it wakes up on their computer, is going to send out another request to my database. And the request at first is just going to be a request saying, hey, what data should I put in the website? My database will probably say onions, garlic, celery, balsamic vinegar. But I can set it up so that later on, I've changed the information in my database. And when the user refreshes the page or comes back to the website, I still send them the same HTML file and the same JavaScript, but the information that gets injected from the database is different. So this split between the information and the display is the split between the front end and the back end, or the back end and the front end. The back end is just everything that goes on behind the scenes to render up that information that the website needs. So I can set up a database on a server somewhere that contains usernames, passwords, images, shopping list ingredients, any other information that I want to become available in my website. And that will all be confined to the back end. The only job of that system will be to make information available. And then I can create my front end, and its only job will be to present information when that information is given to it. The front end goes to the user. The back end stays on a server somewhere that I have control of. And when the user runs that front end code in their browser, it goes away, grabs the information from the database, and presents that to them in a beautiful format. Now, once again, I've set up a demonstration of this. So let's see if we can get that to work. I'm just going to kill my website, and we'll transfer over to the correct site. Let's get to the example front end. Okay. It's always a little bit of fun here while I fix my screen share. I'll show you a little bit behind the curtain as we go. So I'm working right now to set up and make that database run. Perfect. There's always one problem that happens, isn't there?
So right now, Oliver, you're using Ubuntu, so I guess you're using a PC. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool. And so for those that aren't aware, essentially it's kind of like what Terminal is on maybe Mac OS. So that black screen, and this is like running, I guess, like virtually. So a similar sort of thing, only on PC.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Unfortunately, my beautiful website that I created has had a little bit of an error happen to it. It looks like while I was setting up this this demonstration, I must have modified something. How embarrassing. The great news is we can still take a look at the structure of this website. So we'll just zoom in a little bit here. So we can take a look at my example front end, and we can see what's involved in it. I've got some very confusing looking code here, but the core of it isn't visible. The core of it is very similar, in fact, to the HTML that we wrote before. When it runs, it's going to load up on our browser, and it'll look something like this. Just like we had before. It'll be a shopping list website. And behind the scenes, what my browser is going to be doing is going away, making a request from a database and getting the information that we need in order to fill out that database. Now, the database itself, the backend, is going to be run by another slice of code that I have set up. I've got a little program here whose job it is to go away and get that information. And my database is going to be something as simple as, in this case, I used a .txt file. It's not a real database, but it's pretty good, at least for a demonstration like this, when it works correctly. The code isn't too important. The main important thing is the goal there, which is we want to split up the responsibilities between our different parts of our system. We want to have it so that we have the user's browser, which is only responsible for displaying information to the user. And that's the front end part of our system. And we have a web server somewhere whose only responsibility is to get data and make it available to that front end. And that's the back end part of our system. It's the split of responsibility that makes this such a powerful system. And because there is that split of responsibility, what we get is a split in the type of work that different developers and engineers end up doing. As a front-end developer, most of the work that you'll be doing is receiving plans for how a website should look and creating that visual depiction using tools like JavaScript, HTML, CSS, maybe doing a little bit of graphic design as well, but for most large applications, as a front-end designer, you have a team of graphic designers who work with you, and they can help you to decide exactly how things should look. That's a very complex task, and there's a really great scope for improvements of skill and also promotion and professional development within being a front-end developer. On the other hand, as a back-end developer, you tend to work with systems like databases. A really popular one is called SQL, that's SQL. You'll work with tools like servers, and for web servers, the tool that I generally use is called Flask. You need a language called Python to run that, and that's one of the languages that we teach in our boot camps, along with, of course, all the front-end languages. And there, your main focus is going to be tallying up the different sources of information that are going to be required to make a website work, and creating systems that can make that information available. So there's a lot of very clever coding that goes into that. There's a lot of secret parts of the internet that aren't usually on display to members of the public that back-end developers work with day in and day out. And those parts of the internet are really only accessible to other programs like the ones that are running in a user's browser. In our boot camps, we teach a full stack development style, which means you learn both the back end of the website and the front end of the website. We start off from a really, really simple HTML system, like I demonstrated at the start today. And then we'll work through developing each of the different pieces that go into that more complex modern system in order to make a really powerful website available. By the end of a boot camp like ours, you generally have a pretty clear and powerful knowledge of how to create a back-end system, how to create a front-end system, and how to bring them together so that you have a website that you can use as a portfolio piece or that you can put to use in your own life. Now, I did have a little tiny bit more demonstration that I was hoping to give, but unfortunately, with my website down right now, I think we might have to leave it right there. I could probably spend 5 minutes fiddling, but I don't want to tie up everybody's time and possibly have it be to no good end.
Too easy. No worries. Well, look, we can, yeah, definitely have a bit of a chat, maybe get a few people's questions in a bit. I'm sure people have got questions from what they've seen today. We do have one question there from Yugendra saying, what are the boundaries for back-end, front-end, full stack, and DevOps? I'm not sure if you could answer that question, or you can give it a crack. Otherwise, Yugendra, if you could maybe try to clarify a little bit more.
I absolutely can, I think. Yes. So cool. It's a really good question because when one person is working on a project, the boundaries between the work of the front end and the back end can dissolve a little bit. So it's a really sensible thing to ask, what are the boundaries? Where do they break down? Really, those boundaries can move around a little bit. But once you're working on a complex project, generally they divide up quite well. And especially working for a large company or an established web development company, you'll find that you really do get your work packaged up really neatly for you. So on the back end, like I said, you generally work with databases and you generally work with what's called an API, which is a program that runs on a web server and supplies information on demand. And those are sort of the main two chunks that a backend developer will be concerning themselves with. On the front end, you'll generally be writing HTML code, CSS, and JavaScript. And all of the code, or almost all the code that you'll end up writing, will be designed to run in the user's browser, as opposed to on a server somewhere. That's generally the division. If you're working on a solo project, you might create a full stack app, which might just have, say, a really complex backend and a very simple front end, to the point where maybe the lines blur a little bit, but in most cases, that's the answer.
So As far as, I guess, distinction goes between, say, front end and back end, I sort of understand that, say, HTML and CSS is pretty much purely front end stuff. Are there specific back end languages like, I'm not sure whether you can even refer to SQL as a language. Is that more of like a database, or SQL is the language you use to access data from a database? Yeah, cool. Is there any sort of language that sort of crosses over? Like, is there something that is, can be used in both front end and back end?
There absolutely is. And as a matter of fact, it's JavaScript.
Cool.
When JavaScript was first invented, it was designed to just run in the browser, but people have found it so incredibly useful that almost everybody who works in web development these days knows JavaScript and is able to write it. And that means that people have just started using it to write the back end as well. JavaScript is really the core language that we teach in our diplomas, and we use it both in the front end and in the back end to create the two halves together. So,
cool. I don't want to, I guess, this will be my last question, I swear. But I guess JavaScript, that's considered an object-oriented language, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, could you kind of like explain what an object-oriented language is, and why, like, when object-oriented languages sort of came about, why they're like so important, why they're a bit of a game changer?
Definitely, yeah. So the original programming languages that were developed were very, very simple. They were designed to give a series of instructions, one after another, to a computer and have the computer execute those instructions one after another. That's really useful. We call it a scripting paradigm. But in order to do complex work, we need a tool that is a little bit more complex and powerful than that. So the object-oriented paradigm lets us build little sort of building blocks out of our code, rather than just telling the computer, do this or calculate this. Instead, we'll tell the computer, okay, here is a theoretical object that I want you to simulate. If we were writing a computer game, for instance, maybe we would give the computer a ball as an object. And the code that we would write in that object-oriented paradigm would tell the computer how a ball is supposed to act. Does it bounce? Can it be kicked? Does a ball sometimes go out of bounds? Or could it be stolen, transferred from player to player? All of this code is code that we would write about a ball. And then the ball would be the object in our object-oriented language. And rather than giving the computer a whole bunch of instructions about where the ball should move, what it should do, instead we just say, okay, computer, we told you how a ball works. Now here's a ball, make it go. And the computer from those instructions will be able to simulate the action of this ball and do practically all the work for us. It's a way of developing really complex interactions out of something really simple. When it comes to websites and the breakdown between the front end and the back end, generally the kind of objects that we end up with are users. And we've got a series of rules for how users are allowed to act on the website. Or for the very, very simple website that I had up on the screen a moment ago, perhaps an object would be an item in a shopping list. And I'd have a set of rules about how items could be added to the shopping list and removed from the shopping list. Then instead of having to write a whole bunch of instructions about, if you want to add celery to the shopping list, do this. If you want to add balsamic vinegar to the shopping list. Instead, I could just say, okay, computer, you know what a shopping list item is. The users are going to tell you what items they want on the list, and you can figure it out from there.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. No, good description. Thanks for that.
No worries.
We got another question here from Annette. Do you think certain types of people are more suited to either back end or front end? I'm crap at the technical stuff, but like making stuff look pretty.
I think they absolutely are, Annette, definitely. I don't want to say that people necessarily have to confine themselves to either the front end or the back end. I've definitely worked with a whole bunch of students and professionals who can do both and who just have a flair for coding in general. But there are certain sort of skills and interests that really do align themselves very well with either the front end or the back end. And Annette's example is a great one. Liking sort of aesthetic decisions and having a real eye for visual flair is a really great skill to apply in the front end. You get a huge amount of creativity there, and you can really create some beautiful and interesting things using the tools of the front end. There's perhaps a little bit of a stereotype that the back end is a bit more of a mathy, rigorous, sort of clinical style of coding. I have specialized in the back end, and I think that there's just as much room for creativity there. It just tends to not be visual creativity. Instead, it's problem-solving creativity, which I think is another really cool skill.
That's cool. I think, yeah, like you hear a lot of people when they think of creativity, think of more like, when it comes to like web design rather than web development. But, I've heard so much like about creativity. There is so much creativity available in development itself, as well. So I think we had a guy called Rory who actually came into our boot camps a few years ago and was just looking to learn a bit of front end. He actually he was a crane driver, but now he's in DevOps, and he actually fell in love with back end development. And he said it's ridiculous just how much creativity is there and what you can do with these things. So I guess creative people don't need to get into design. You can get into development as well. And I found that another thing is we have a lot of people come on board for our boot camps that actually come from a musical background. It's actually crazy. A lot of people have come from studying music and then moved into development. Like there is clearly a connection there. Like it's, I thought it might have been a coincidence, but it's happened too many times now. So yeah.
There absolutely is a connection there, I think. It's the same creative orchestrational intelligence, I think, that gets applied there for sure.
So Gabriel Scott, what backend languages are easier to run conditionals with, like else if, etc.?
Yeah, so I'd say that almost every programming language has those logical conditionals built into it as sort of a core feature. But to answer the question best, I'd say probably Python is the language that I find working with conditionals easiest in. That's not necessarily a fact about conditionals themselves in Python, but Python is the language that I think is the most conversational in its structure. When you program Python, it's almost as though you're speaking plain English to the computer and telling it what to do. So that makes it quite easy to set up those kind of conditionals without tying your brain in knots. And Python is the language that we start our diploma students on. As soon as they have HTML and CSS, we give them Python.
It makes sense, like, that, we start with Python, and, also people tend to get drawn to Python because it's, it is a higher level language. And, the higher level you get, the closer to English it is, or spoken English, it's going to be easier to understand. So, yeah, it seems like a really good place to start. I've also heard with object-oriented languages, just because Python is one as well, essentially, once you learn one fairly well, you can pretty much learn the rest because the syntax is basically, just slightly different for all of them. So is that correct?
Yeah, it definitely is. Absolutely, one's first language is where one learns the most about programming. And then learning a second language or a third language gets easier and easier as you go. I have thought to myself before that when you learn the first language, you learn how to do things with programming. And then when you pick up your second language, that's kind of like the second largest chunk of information that you get, because just like learning human languages, spoken languages, the language that you know first, you don't necessarily notice the grammar in it. You don't necessarily notice the logic that goes on underneath in order to make that language work. When you learn a second language, like if I were to pick up German or something like that, I would also learn a whole bunch about English grammar in the process, because I'd be seeing the differences between those two languages and appreciating them for the first time. So I think it's really great to pick up Python as a first language because it has that conversational sort of plain English feel to it. And then once you have that tool and once your brain is kind of prepared for how programming languages work, picking up another language like JavaScript or maybe Ruby or something like that is a really great second step, because it sort of more than doubles the amount of knowledge that you have about programming.
Cool. Awesome. Anastasia says, are there more positions for universal developers who do both front and back end, or is it usually more specialized?
That's a really great question, Anastasia. As a matter of fact, it started off being quite specialized, but as the internet has become more and more complex and more powerful in recent years, and especially as JavaScript has gotten more and more popular for use on the front end and the back end, companies are now hiring people who are full stack developers who can do it all. That's partly something that's really convenient for companies, because it means that they can just hire one person and that person can be useful everywhere. But it's also something that's really, really useful for professionals and employees, because by being able to apply yourself to both the back end and the front end, first of all, you make yourself more employable, which is great. If you can do it all, you can work anywhere. But also, you get a better understanding of how the whole product that you're creating operates. And that makes you more powerful in the work that you do. You can create better tools and create better websites and better applications. So definitely, there are a lot of positions out there for full stack developers who work both on the front end and the back end.
And that's why, we teach full stack development in our web dev boot camps, I guess. You're just a more versatile developer. It just means that there's more jobs available to you. So yeah, you're 100% right. And yeah, I really do like, not only, do you, I guess, you've got more job opportunities available to you, but yeah, it's so much better when you can see, I guess, both sides of the coin, rather than being like someone who was a back-end developer who is just like angry at the front-end developer team, because, you get to see both sides of it, right? So yeah.
Absolutely.
And next thing you know, you're a scrum master. So look.
It definitely does give a lot of scope for career progression as well. I think the broader your professional remit is, the more you have on your plate and the more you're able to take on, the higher and higher it's possible to be promoted within a company, or to find a new job that is of a higher caliber, because you understand what everybody in the team is doing, and that gives you the power to sort of manage or assist or facilitate more elements of a company's product.
Cool. Does anyone have any more questions at all? We wouldn't want you to leave this evening with unanswered questions. So please go ahead and throw something in if you've got anything else lingering in your mind. Otherwise, yeah, we might call it a day, Oliver.
Sounds good.
Cool.
I am going to post a link to that that companion document that I created. What I might do is I'll link to it now in the chat, and then I might also just update it after the fact to have some screenshots of that those websites in action, because with that last website embarrassingly breaking like it did, I'd love to be able to leave people with an idea of what it would have looked like and how it would have operated. So,
sure. Well, while you're doing that, we'll just answer another question. What are the chances of landing a job remotely straight after the 6-month boot camp that we offer?
That's a really good question. They're definitely higher than they were before, especially in the last 2 years. I'm sure everybody's sick of talking about it and hearing about it, but the job marketplace has changed in a huge way. And there are definitely quite a few opportunities that I'm seeing, at least on the professional social media that I'm involved in, for remote opportunities, for sure. I'd say they're pretty decent, really.
Yeah.
It obviously depends on the individual and the kind of opportunities that you pursue. Often with the partnerships team, when we try to set up internships with our graduates, we'll try and find them something nearby if we can. And the result there is that you tend to be in a position where you don't have to work remotely. A lot of people find that they actually like coming into the office, even if it's just for a couple of days a week. But as far as opportunities in the broader workspace, in the broader sort of society go, definitely there are a lot of opportunities for remote work at the moment. So,
I mean, yeah, I think Seek kind of says it all really with actually creating a whole section that is work from home. Like that's now an option that you can choose, and it's just all remote work in there. And that happened, in like the last year or so during COVID. So, and there's plenty of companies out there that we've partnered with through Coder Academy, small and medium companies that have literally just completely closed up their offices altogether, and now they just run as an entirely remote company. So yeah, look, as far as remote is concerned, like the tech industry is definitely at the forefront of that particular thing. So yeah, there's definitely opportunity for remote work out there directly after the boot camp. That's for sure. Yeah,
most definitely. All right.
Cool.
Perhaps we don't have any more questions just yet. I'll drop the link in the chat, but we can also, as I said, I'll be updating that webpage to have a little bit more content there to give an example of what that website's going to look like, because I'm sad I couldn't show it off.
Cool. No, these things happen. But yeah, how much memory does the laptop need for full stack? So yeah, for RAM, look, we recommend to have 16 gig. You can get away with 8 gig, to be fair, but 16 is kind of like a nice, somewhat standard these days. And as far as like SSD or hard drive space, to be fair, you don't really need that much at all. Yeah, what actually gets installed on your machine is very, very little, and a lot of the stuff that you actually use gets stored in GitHub. So like cloud space, that sort of stuff. Yeah, so really, like, yeah, not much at all is needed. So whatever you have is probably enough.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, definitely. I've had students who've joined the boot camp before, whose laptop has been kind of chockers to the point where they need to delete something if they want to save something. I'd say definitely avoid that situation. You do need to have a little bit of space free to install new programs and create new files. But as long as the laptop runs quite well, as long as you have a relatively up-to-date operating system, and like Dallas said, ideally 16 gigabytes of RAM, but 8 will get you through. You're pretty much good to go.
I'll just throw my my details in here, guys. If you have any further questions about any of our boot camps, or you're looking to potentially come on board, then definitely reach out to me for a chat. Happy to have a bit of a chin wag with you about what we have on offer. There's one starting next week actually, but yeah, otherwise we have a couple more coming up in August. So happy to have a chat with everyone, and yeah, also check out our website because there's always plenty going on there. And you'll have a bit more of an idea of what boot camps we have available too. Cool. Rightio. Well, Oliver, do you have anything else to add?
Just thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon, I hope. And thank you, Dallas, very much for being the host with the most.
Stop it. Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for taking the time out of your Thursday. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the next one, or having a chat, or maybe even seeing you in a class real soon. Cool.
Thanks a lot, folks.